UFC Vegas 100 betting show. We have 12 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to get things started in the women's bantamweight division as Melissa Mullen comes in as a minus 245 favorite. The comeback on UFC newcomer Claudio Saigula is plus 200. And we'll start on the Mullen side. She's coming off a knockout loss to Nora Cornoli her last time out, which was not a good look. She's also been dropped in both of her UFC fights. The durability seems to be an issue for her. Her striking is not very good, and she's very sloppy defensively on the feet, but she is a pretty solid grappler, and I'd expect her to lean on that here, where she should have an advantage. She holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and on the flip side, Saigula is a 6-1 prospect fighting out of Poland. She hasn't really faced a super high level of competition on the regional scene, so I have some doubts that she's going to be able to walk right in here to the UFC and really make a difference, even at the lower levels of the division. She's primarily a grappler because on the feet, while she's aggressive and seems to have a little bit of power, she's very sloppy. And she's not only sloppy on the feet, but also on the mat. She holds a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and she's had some grappling success over a lot of these fighters who I mentioned are not very high level on the regional scene. I don't think that's going to be the case here against Melissa Mullen because Saigula gets very sloppy in some of those grappling exchanges, falling out of positions, etc. And I just think Mullen is going to be a little bit better, a little bit more proven at this stage. The UFC experience, the grappling advantage, I think it's going to be enough to be the difference. We'll say it's Mullen by decision. That's the official pick. Next up, we have Tresean Gore, minus 180 favorite. The comeback on Antonio Troli is plus 150. And we haven't seen Tresean Gore in a while. He's coming off a 2-year layoff as we last saw him get that submission victory over Josh Fremd. Now, since then, he's dealt with a couple of injuries. He had a wrist injury, I believe, in 2022. And then last year, he was forced to pull out of the Bo Nichols fight with a shoulder injury. So he's been riddled with injuries over the last couple of years. It'll be good to see him get back in the octagon. But aside from the long layoff, which is always a concern, I'm also concerned with Tresean Gore's just overall round minute winning ability, because historically, he doesn't push a pace on the feet, even though he's a good striker, fast hands, solid boxing. He doesn't put a ton of activity out there, and he doesn't really look to grapple all that much either, so he's kind of a thin margins guy. So I have concerns with him anytime he's a moderate-sized favorite here. But then on the flip side, Antonio Troli, I'm not sure if he's very good either, to be honest with you. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's going to be the bigger fighter in there, 5-inch reach advantage as well. But he's low volume on the feet. He's not a very good striker. And I don't even know if he's going to be able to lean on some of his attributes to use them to an advantage against a guy like Gore. So I could really see this one going either way. I'm probably not going to get involved, to be honest. But I'm going to say the official pick is going to be Gore by decision. Next fight up, we have Damon Blackshear, minus 285 favorite. The comeback on Cody Staman is plus 230. And Blackshear's currently on a 2-fight losing streak. The last time we saw him out there, he got basically flatlined by one of the first punches that Montel Jackson threw. He went to throw a leg kick, boom, and Stone Cold got knocked out. So not a great look for him there. He's currently on a 2-fight losing streak, trying to get back in the win column here. And he's somebody that I think is pretty well-rounded. On the feet, he fights out of the southpaw stance, stays pretty sharp defensively, and also will blast away with those leg kicks as well. But we know that he's at his best when he goes to his grappling. He averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but we have seen the gas tank be a little bit spotty at times, which is a concern going up against somebody in Cody Staman, who we know historically has very good cardio. Staman also comes from a collegiate wrestling background. I do think that this line is a little bit wide here. I think the market is just clearly low on Staman coming off that loss against Taylor Lapilus. But look, guys, that matchup was much different. Lapilus, very difficult to take down. Staman didn't really get his grappling going. And then on the feet, he was just one step behind. Against Blackshear, I don't think that that's going to be the case. I expect the striking to be very competitive with it being Blackshear's kicks versus the jab of Cody Staman for the most part. Staman also has some good leg kicks as well. And I think both guys could have some grappling success here. Both guys are capable of landing landing takedowns. Staman, if he's on top, usually pretty positionally sound. So I actually think Staman is a pretty live underdog here. Not enough to fully take the shot on him here. We do have the birthday narrative. He turns 35 years old on Saturday, but because I do think there's at least a little bit of risk that he has lost a step at this stage in his career due to some of the recent performances where he hasn't gone to the wrestling as much, he hasn't put out as much volume. Those are some concerns, but not enough to make him plus 230 here. I'm going to slightly side with Blackshear. We'll say the official pick is Blackshear by decision, but I'm likely going to be rooting for Cody. Might even have some action on him as well. Next up, we have Charles Radkey, a minus 162 favorite. The comeback on Matt Semelsberger is plus 136. And I like Matt Semelsberger in this spot for a couple reasons. For starters, Matt Semelsberger has big power for this division. We've seen it in just about all of his fights. He's landed 9 knockdowns in the UFC, and you guys are probably thinking, well, John, if he's landed 9 knockdowns, he must have 5, 6 knockouts in the UFC, right? No, he's only got 2 knockouts in the UFC, and that's the one gripe of Semelsberger, is that when he has guys hurt, he's not very good at finishing the job. He also is liable to get kind of wrapped up in some of these grappling exchanges where he's not very good. He can give up takedowns, defends at under 50% in the UFC, and I think that's where people have been able to take advantage of him, whereas Radkey, I don't know if he has that skill set, because Semelsberger comes from a little bit of a wrestling background himself, and Radkey doesn't really push the wrestling at all. So this is one where I think Radkey's going to need to beat Semelsberger on the feet. And I just don't think he can do that. I also think Radkey hasn't really faced, huge power like Semelsberger. Obviously, he's coming off a knockout loss to Carlos Prates, who we'll see fight in the main event. Radkey can be hurt. He can be knocked out like we saw in his last fight, and he's facing somebody that's very powerful that I think you need to grapple to take advantage of his biggest weakness, and I'm just not convinced that Radkey's going to be able to do that. We'll say it's Semelsberger by TKO. That's the official pick. Which brings us to kind of the curveball of the entire slate, as we have Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, a minus 425 favorite. Now, the comeback on UFC newcomer Zachary Scogin is plus 325. And the reason I say it's a curveball is because Dos Santos was originally scheduled to fight Nicholas Dalby, who pulled out, and now we're getting Scogin on short notice. But if you're playing on Draftkings, of course, they already released the pricing. So now Dos Santos at only 8K is one of the biggest betting favorites on the card. So that's going to be something that we definitely discuss from a strategy and game theory perspective on the DraftKings Deep Dive show at fightnumbers.com. But in terms of the matchup here, I'll tell you a little bit about Scogin. He's a 7-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Kansas. He trains with Trey Ogden and Garrett Armfield, formerly the James Krause gym, Glory MMA, that you guys would be familiar with. He also is the former FAC middleweight champion, and he's typically a finisher, but you look at the level of competition and it's been very low, and I'm not sure that he's going to be able to, step up here on short notice against somebody that's a dangerous finisher in Dos Santos. 17 of his 24 wins have come inside the distance, and how does he win here? He's an okay striker, a little bit janky on the feet, heavy on the lead leg, but he does have powerful leg kicks, seems to have some power in his hands as well. He likes to go to his grappling. He's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's where he's able to have a lot of success against these lower level guys. I just don't think he's going to be able to do that against Zaleski dos Santos, who I know has probably, maybe has one more fight in him at this stage. He's almost 38 years old, but I still think that he's proven over his last couple fights even that he's not, he's still here, not just to earn a paycheck, but to potentially find a finish, and I think he could do that on Saturday. We'll say it's Zaleski dos Santos by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Cortavius Romeus, a minus 225 favorite. The comeback on Gaston Balanos is plus 185. And this is one where I like some violence. And there's a couple fights this weekend that I think I'm going to lean into some violence, whether it's the prop market or just targeting fights to finish inside the distance. We haven't seen a ton of cards with a ton of finishes, right? It's been super decision heavy really all year. But this is a card where I expect, it's lower level. People aren't excited about it. This could be one where we just dial up the violence here. And based on the matchups, I could totally see that happening. And this fight is an example of that, because Romeus super athletically gifted, very fast, has a flashy striking style, but he's also an opportunistic submission grappler. He fought on the Contender Series last season and the season prior. Of course, 2 seasons ago, he got knocked out by Ramon Taveras, and then he was on last season and he won a decision over Michael Imperato, but he really put it on him and nearly finished him in that fight. He's a training partner of Montel Jackson, and I just think he's one of those guys that has that athletic cheat code, even if he doesn't have the best round winning ability, because he's definitely more of a moments fighter as opposed to a minutes fighter. And on the flip side, Balanos is really just a one-dimensional power puncher. 6 of his 7 career wins have come by knockout. That is going to be the way that he wants to win this fight, and he's certainly capable of doing so. He has power in his hands. We know Romeus can get a little bit froggy at times and has paid the price, like in that Taveras fight. So this is one that I think either guy can hurt each other on the feet. Where I see a bigger advantage for Romeus is that Balanos, the defensive grappling is not very good. He's been submitted twice in his career. That's where I think Romeus will have the biggest edge here, and he is willing to chain some submission attempts together, as we've seen in some of his previous fights. So it's one that I think I'm probably just going to lean into a finish. I don't like the money line price here of Romeus. I think it's a little bit too steep in a fight that I do expect to be pretty high variance, but I am going to side with Romeus. We'll say it's Romeus by submission. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Denise Gomes, a minus 520 favorite. The comeback on Karolina Kowalkiewicz is plus 390. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this fight because I think it's pretty obvious what most people expect to happen. Not just the market here pricing it in at minus 520, but the way they match up. Denise Gomes, high volume striker, but she carries some of the biggest power in this division for my money. And then on the flip side, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, also a high volume striker, doesn't carry really any type of knockout power. So I think she's going to be at a big disadvantage in the big moments category. Like when Gomes hits her, it's going to be very significant, whereas she can probably kind of walk through whatever Karolina sends back her way. And then Gomes, we've seen struggle at times with the defensive grappling, but she's got pretty solid cardio, and she's good at working back to her feet, taking over as the fights go on. So I don't really see a path to victory for Karolina with the grappling. I don't see much of a path to her in the striking either. So it's going to be one where I think the only real question here is how Gomes wins. Is she going to do it by decision, or can she potentially knock out Karolina, who has been knocked out in the past? I know it's been a while, but she's almost 40 years old. She's taken a lot of damage in her career. I think a KO is on the table. Ultimately, though, I'm going to say this one hits the judges' scorecards. We'll say it's Gomes by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Mansur Abdulmalik, a minus 375 favorite. The comeback on Dusko Todorovic is plus 295. And Abdulmalik was one of my favorite prospects coming off this last season of Contender Series. You guys know I do a lot of work on Contender Series on my YouTube channel. So I would encourage you to go back and watch week 1 video where I broke down Abdulmalik, and then watch the fight on Contender Series. I thought, parts of his game looked very good. I also thought there's still other parts that we still need to see develop. The thing is, in this matchup, I don't really think it's going to matter all that much, because I think the UFC is giving him kind of a layup with Dusko Todorovic. Todorovic is somebody that's coming off a very long layoff. He blew out his knee at UFC 286 last March. He's coming off like a year and a half or so layoff, and he's never been somebody that has had good defense. He fights with his hands down. He's been knocked out multiple times in the UFC. He's also, despite coming off the layoff and the ACL concerns, he's never been able to defend takedowns. He defends takedowns at under 50% in the UFC. So this is a guy, in terms of the matchup, that you are clearly giving to Abdulmalik, who comes from a Division I collegiate wrestling background at University of Maryland. He also wrestled as a redshirt senior, I guess, at a local, very high-level wrestling school in high school. That's actually in my area. His wrestling's very good. He's extremely powerful. The power on the feet cannot be understated. If he touches you once, you're probably going to sleep. We also saw in that Contender Series fight where he was taken down a little bit, wasn't able to get his game going much, but the second that he was able to land some big shots in round 2, I mean, it was pretty scary. And I think this is one where he is going to be able to implement his game from the jump. He can land the takedowns at will here against Dusko Todorovic. He can also hurt him on the feet. We'll say it's Abdulmalik inside round 1. and it's going to be a knockout here. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Jillian Robertson, a minus 395 favorite. The comeback on Luana Pinheiro is plus 310. And Robertson, you guys don't need me to tell you, she's a very aggressive submission grappler, and she's also very one-dimensional. She has to have that grappling success in just about all of her fights. Most of her wins have come by submission, and the times when she hasn't been able to get the fight to the ground, she's really struggled. But she usually only struggles against girls that are more physical than her, and she's unable to get the fight to the ground. I don't expect that to be the case here. While Pinheiro is powerful early, and she does come from a judo background, the key here for me is that Pinheiro is willing to engage in the grappling. She does in pretty much all of her fights. So I expect Robertson to not only be able to land takedowns herself, especially when Pinheiro gets tired, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see Pinheiro go for takedowns, which I think is going to be a mistake here. I think her going to the mat with Jillian is going to prove to be a mistake. Jillian drowns her over the course of 15 minutes and finds a finish. We'll say it's Robertson by submission. That's the official pick. And next up, we have Bernardo Sapai, a minus 340 favorite. The comeback on Ricky Tercios is plus 270. And you guys know me, I've never been a Tercios guy. He's coming off a submission loss to my guy, the young stud, Raul Rosas Jr., who submitted him inside the second round, cashed a big 900 round 2 sub ticket there. I also think this is a spot where Sapai is going to have multiple advantages here. Not only is he a powerful hitter on the feet, but he also can go to the wrestling, and that's something that's given Tercios problems throughout his career. He has paper hips. He defends takedowns at under 50%. The one thing I'll say about Tercios that's positive is he's usually very squirrely. It's hard to control him unless you're taking the back. He's probably going to be able to work back up to his feet. He also has some opportunistic submission attempts in his bag, and he has very good cardio. So if this is one where you think the gas tank might be a concern for Sapai because he faded against Vinicius Oliveira in his UFC debut, I could see the live betting angle for Tercios. The thing is, and why I would pour a little bit of cold water on that, is because that fight was on short notice for Sapai, and historically, his cardio actually looked very good. So I think that might have just been more of a short notice thing. I could be wrong, but and I also think that Oliveira still had a lot of power to be able to hurt him, whereas Tercios doesn't typically carry a ton of power really at all. So it's one where I think Sapai should have multiple advantages. I don't love the price tag here, but I do think he is the rightful favorite. We'll say it's Sapai by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Renier de Ridder, a minus 298 favorite. The comeback on Gerald Meerschaert is plus 240. And de Ridder's making his UFC debut here. He's a 17-2 prospect. He's the former light heavyweight champ in one championship promotion, and he seems to have a pretty well-rounded skill set. He fights out of the southpaw stance, seems to carry some power on the feet, and he also comes from a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. He holds a black belt. He comes from a tournament grappling background. He also has finished a lot of his fights by submission. So this is one where I do think he can not only win on the feet over Gerald Meerschaert, but also potentially win on the mat. The one concern I have is that historically, going to the mat with Gerald Meerschaert is a mistake. This dude's last 9 wins have all come by submission, including his last 2 where he's on a 2-fight winning streak. The thing is I still worry about Meerschaert's durability. He's been knocked out 4 times in his career. I also think Meerschaert just being so willing to play from the bottom, if he's unable to pull off that hero submission against somebody that is so well-versed in the grappling realm in de Ridder, then I don't think he's going to be winning minutes here. So again, it's one where I don't like the price tag on de Ridder, but I do think that maybe we can attack this fight from multiple different prop angles, maybe a Meerschaert late sub angle, maybe a de Ridder early KO angle, something like that. Like either way, I do think somebody gets finished here. I'm going to say the official pick is de Ridder by TKO, but again, the money line price tag, UFC debut, couple of questions here. I'm not willing to get involved in the money line. I think you're better off just targeting a prop, but the official pick is going to be de Ridder by TKO. Which brings us to our main event, as Carlos Prates is a minus 800 favorite. He's the biggest betting favorite on the card, with Neil Magny on the comeback at plus 550. And honestly, like, I was kind of surprised to even see this was a main event back when it was booked. And it kind of speaks to the level of this card, but it's okay because like I said, there's a couple good betting angles I like on this card. And we have a banger card, the return of Jon Jones next week. So usually when we have a big card coming up, they always put one of these lower level cards in kind of a stinker main event. And that's what we're getting here because this is clearly, the UFC just continuing to build up Carlos Prates here. He's 3-0 in the UFC. All 3 wins have come by knockout. And the one concern I've always had with Prates, of course, the striking is great, comes from a high level Muay Thai background. The knockout power, the leg kicks are great. Trains at Fighting Nerds, which is great camp as well. Always have a solid game plan. But I do think the defensive grappling issues will at some point probably end up hurting him. I just don't think that this version of Neil Magny is going to be able to take advantage of that. I know that's going to probably be the game plan for Magny, but now at this stage, he's just going to be a step behind on the feet. And I don't know if he has the physicality to have the grappling success that he needs to give this guy a vet lesson. So it's a big price tag to pay, but I do think Prates KO is the most likely outcome here, and that is going to be the official pick. As always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have all of my projections. It'll have the betting trends tool, the odds screen, fight pick sim, all of that stuff. Check it out, fightnumbers.com. And lastly, I will say I almost did not do the show this week. I'm a little bit under the weather. I was behind, but I was like, you know what? I'm not going to let my YouTube people down. I got to power through this week. So do me a favor, take the 30 seconds, like the video, drop a comment, help the algorithm, and I would definitely appreciate it. As always, appreciate you watching. Best of luck, and we will see you next week.